This is a copy of the ad that I believe many of you have seen, maybe all of you didn't, that was in the Washington Times, and we will have it passed around in a moment. We have the face of Barack Obama where it should be, imbued in a mushroom cloud. Those of us who've been with Mr. LaRouche over the years were around when we first pulled this trick, which was in the first ever nationwide televised broadcast by a third party. This was back in 1976. We bought a half an hour of television and we campaigned against Jimmy Carter. And the slogan was, "A vote for Carter is a vote for thermonuclear war." And thus the infomercial was born, the actual story. Lyndon LaRouche was the first person to ever go on television, and if you ever get a chance to see that spot, completely extemporaneously, he speaks for 25 minutes straight on policy after this illustration. It's an actual animation, in that case, of a nuclear explosion and then Carter's face. So I just want to point out that this was in the Washington Times. We were in Washington this week lobbying. I think many of you were there with that. So that is our first illustration of the day. The second illustration is only by means of, shall we say, entertaining the locals. This is from the New York Post of today, and it has a picture of our president, erstwhile, with one of his close supporters, the Reverend Al Sharpton. And it says, "Reverend Al pushed drug deal, pal." And it has Barack Obama embracing Mr. Sharpton at his National Action Network meeting of yesterday. Sharpton was eager to sell coke, says 1980s friend. Now, I only really put this here for the purposes of pointing something out. There's a famous story, I think, I just want to actually quote it precisely, of the prophecy that Daniel provides to Nebuchadnezzar. And in that prophecy, here's what's said. "Your Majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth." And that is our situation on the eve of the impeachment and removal of Barack Obama from the presidency of the United States. So in that context and with that regard, I'd like to introduce first Mr. Bruce Todd. Now, a lot of you know him as a congressional candidate. Bruce and I go back quite a way, since about 1975. I want to say something about what his campaign in precise terms represents. You know, when you've campaigned and organized and deployed, as almost everybody here has for many years, and those of you who haven't had the privilege of doing that yet, you will. Not meaning that the campaign goes on forever, but because there will be work to do if we win. A lot of work, maybe more work to do if we win. For those of you that have done that, one of the things that becomes most important over the years is persistence in the right, but also a kind of persistence that's also sharp. The sharp ability to make a point clear and keep it clear and keep it in focus. Now, in our time, we've lost a lot of the capacity of our country to produce. We have people who no longer know how to work. We have a great crisis in that even if we were to get Glass-Steagall tomorrow, as you know, how will we rebuild the country? And the way we're going to do it is with people exactly like the man you're about to hear from. He's running in the 3rd Congressional District, and I hope he's elected, Bruce Todd.
Thank you, Dennis. Good afternoon. I would like to say a couple of things about the congressional campaign. I expect it to be very lively. Diane and I had the wonderful experience of going to the State Democratic Party dinner Thursday night, where Diane had written up this great leaflet of why we should. It was the Jefferson-Jackson dinner, which is done every year. In fact, it's very widely known across the country. In fact, when the president won re-election, he had asked the Jackson Marching Band, named for the city of, or the town of Jackson, to come and be at his inauguration. And the intent around the Democratic dinner the other night, as Diane had put it, was to change the name. The name being should instead be the Roosevelt-Kennedy dinner, because we are out to revive the real content of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, which for many people, particularly with the idea of Jackson, had represented the party of treason. The beginnings of the transformation of the Democratic Party into what transpired into the Southern Confederacy, and in the North, what was known as the Copperhead faction, the faction that attempted to take down the Union through the use of the Confederacy, all of which was organized by the British Empire, and which is very well documented. People, in fact, I was in discussion on the way up here with people talking about how Britain had financed, to a large extent, the Confederacy, whether it was through issuing bonds for the cotton, which they needed for their mills, but also that was used to finance the military capability of the South, both its naval armaments, which they were trying to do covertly, but which people from the Union who had been over in Europe had identified as, as what it was, and which the North continually had to, remind Great Britain that it was not supposed to be taking sides, although they were clearly taking sides, and using the South to bring the North down and end the most hated thing that they knew at the time, which was the American system that came out of the American Revolution and, the development of a constitutional republic. And they were totally committed to that, and still are committed to that today, because we represent, as a nation, the most striking example of the opposition to that idea of empire. That's what the Constitution was all about. It was about taking, instead of the European idea of those few that ruled and everybody else were the serfs or the slaves or somewhat in between, depending on whose butt you wanted to kiss, the idea that every person had a chance to become a giant like the founders were, who organized a tiny nation to take on and defeat the British Empire, with the help of others, like Russia, for example, at the time, who lent a large weight to the American Revolution. So that's what we had. That's what we were intent on establishing in this dinner the other night. The fact that people who consider themselves real Democrats have to revive that idea that it was Franklin Roosevelt who organized this nation to beat back the empires of Japan, Germany, and others, and reestablish a sense of peace for the world and a potential prospect for the future. And and people immediately picked up on that idea, a number of people. In fact, there was the state chairman who brought up in his presentation, seemingly out of the blue, the fact that Roosevelt and Kennedy were important again. You know, it wasn't really Jefferson and Jackson who were, you know, although Jefferson helped write the Constitution, but he had problems. And Jackson clearly did not represent the real Roosevelt and Kennedy idea of a Democratic Party that fought for the common man, that fought to rebuild the world. And Kennedy, whose ideas around the space program really exemplified, you know, what the United States was all about. That literally there were no obstacles that we couldn't overcome, and literally change the entire world by doing it. You know, so that's really what we're going to be doing with our campaigns, not only here but across the country. And I'm sure everyone will be very excited about what's going to be being brought forward by Keisha Rogers and by Mike Steger and by Diane around the fight to do this. But it is crucially important that we revive that Democratic Party for what it has to do for the nation right now. Now, at this meeting also, I expected to meet one of my opponents, or both of them, but neither showed up for the event, because my intent would have been to demand that they debate the issues. You know, they can't go to the Congress, or they can't get out of the primaries without being tasked with what really is facing the nation, whether it be Ukraine, which is on everybody's mind. Everybody that I've talked to here in the state or in recent discussions down in Washington, D.C., at congressional offices, understand they're not backing away from reality, understand how very deadly dangerous this situation is, and that how clearly the administration is totally intent on provoking thermonuclear confrontation and potentially thermonuclear war with Russia over this. You know, none of the candidates anywhere in this country can avoid the issue of Glass-Steagall anymore. You know, every day people pick up the papers and they either see the criminality of Wall Street, you know, going on. They see the people talking, even people that are very closely associated with the original bailouts, talking about the potential for another total meltdown of the financial system. And people can readily see, particularly again in the Ukraine, how this was driven by the financial collapse. That this was an attempt to undercut Ukraine's attempt to back away from being drawn into what anyone would have to consider a suicidal economic policy, going with Europe, going with the collapse of an entire system of governments that can't support their own populations. For them, clearly, it was no option other than going with their most stable economic partnership, which was Russia, right? So again, for us here, the issue is, through Glass-Steagall, is not only to stabilize the economic collapse here and give us the basis for a leg up out of the crisis that's been ongoing and accelerating since 2007, 2008, but that can lay the foundation for an economic recovery. And a number of people have even said, this is really what Europe needs as well. And they know it. This is an ongoing discussion among certain factions in Europe, certain factions in Britain, certain factions in Germany, and clearly is on the minds of top leading officials in Russia as well. Right? I don't know I forget exactly what his position is, but Ivanov, who's the director of drug affairs for Russia, has also been a consistent proponent of Glass-Steagall, saying that not only is it important from the standpoint of economic recovery, but it also would create the transparency that would allow the drug networks to be going after. People like HSBC, one of the too big to fail banks, who's been caught laundering drug money, because that's a crucial aspect of the international drug trafficking network. Without that ability to transfer tens upon tens of billions of dollars on a daily, weekly, yearly basis, you would not have drug networks, right? And it also is a major funding apparatus for the terrorist operations globally. So this is another aspect to Glass-Steagall. It creates the forensic analysis of a banking system which is totally corrupt and in total collapse. The drug monies are a crucial aspect of being able to keep that system alive. So Glass-Steagall carries out a number of functions all at once, which is absolutely necessary. Now, the other thing is that it'll also allow us to create the basis for an economic recovery. The NWAPA programs that we've been consistently pushing, the reestablishment of the space program, the consistent advancing development of the nuclear capability of the country, and particularly an Apollo project for fusion, which we should have had a long time ago, was one of the major areas of consideration with the Kennedy administration. It wasn't just the space program as far as getting somebody on the moon using chemical capabilities of, for propulsion. But in fact, I brought along today, for anybody that wants to see it, the actual development, which was ongoing back in the 60s, but halted in the 70s, for the rover space program, space nuclear rocket program. A capability which, if it had been followed through with, would have been able to produce a thrust capability twice of what the shuttle main rocket was capable of doing. And the importance of that was it does take 90% of all the fuel to take that rocket off the launch pad and get it into orbit, just to be able to do that. So if you're doubling the thrust capability of that rocket, not only can you go for bigger payloads, but you can actually go for longer distances. You can go past the moon. You can go into Mars, the area of the solar system around Mars, right, where we need to be putting technical capability up there. So that's just a few of the things that we're going to be going after. It's one of there's a laundry list of things that we need to be doing as far as in the immediate. Down in Washington, D.C., we took a delegation of people this past Wednesday. We were talking with people with everything from the reopening of the 9/11 investigation, the release publicly of the 28 pages dealing with the Saudis, dealing with the terrorist apparatus that not only created the conditions for, the most widespread misuse of civil liberties in the country, but also creates the basis for taking away these networks that are creating these instabilities globally. And again, that reaches not just from the Middle East, it reaches into Europe, into Russia, reaches into China, reaches into all these areas where we don't need those instabilities. If there was any time that we needed stability in the world, it's right now. We don't need to be knocking down the bridges of opportunity for cooperation, right? Like what's going on in the recent period over the Ukraine, where major figures from Russia are now being denied their cooperative counterparts, activity with their counterparts in the West, in the U.S., among European leaders. So all of these things have to be addressed, right? And those are the things that we need to be debating with our opponents, with the sitting constitutional or congressional people in Washington, with the senators down there, and with the average people across the country. Because that's most important. We have to create that debate among the American public, because that's who is going to ultimately make the decision on the direction of where the country goes. But we have to provide the leadership, we have to provide the opportunity for debate, and we have to create the real issues that people have to address, not the side issues that people are being thrown at people to take them off of the real issues, like Glass-Steagall, like going after the Saudi role in 9/11, which created the most horrendous civil liberties situation in the country. And that's what our campaigns are all about. And so I thank you for your time, and we look forward to any questions you have at the end of the meeting. So thank you again.